Good morning, everyone. Hola. Gonna wait for a few more people. Come on, let's get to 20. Where is everybody? All right, we're at 20. I'm gonna go ahead and start. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a nice weekend. So, today's lesson is going to have both. It's going to be the same for both SL and HL. And so we're going to start to talk about things like GUIs, graphic user interfaces, and how can we create simple GUIs. So the objective here is pretty soon you guys are going to start writing an internal assessment. And when you write your internal assessment, you're going to have to create a program. And so presumably you want that program to be interactive, to look nice. And so I want you to be able to create a simple GUI, okay? So admittedly, I'm not an expert on GUIs. I feel much stronger in terms of computational thinking and algorithmic thinking, but in terms of making things look nice, that's just not naturally my strong suit. So, anyways, I wanted to point out that in your textbook, there's a chapter 16, which is GUIs, events, and GUI components and events. This chapter is virtual. So you go to the website here and you can download the chapter. And then also the following chapter is about mouse, keyboard sounds, and images. Okay. And that one is also one that is online. So if you guys are reading along on the textbook, that's helpful. Although I will say that the chapter on GUIs and on keyboard events, they're not very good. I found them to be so condensed that they're not terribly useful. So I think probably the best thing for you to do if you're confused by what I'm saying in this lesson and in subsequent lessons would be to find tutorials, look at the Java documentation, and experiment. Experiment with compiling a code one way versus another way. All right. So I think I'm just going to go directly into screen share. So give me 1 second here. Um, okay, so first of all, I just have the Java methods. Uh, the Here's the chapters that I was saying. So each chapter is pretty short. I mean, when you consider all of the they've got a title page and copyright information, and it's really only about 10 or 15 pages. Not a lot to read. Same thing with this chapter. So, it's a pretty quick read, but I don't think it's a very helpful or good read. All right. So, we are going to be. So let's just go to Genie. Let me make this a little bit larger. Zoom in. Zoom in. So, first thing I want to talk about is you need to import when you're using when you're creating a GUI. You want to import javax.swing.star. So the .star means import everything. And so that has the code for all of the GUI components that we'll need. Then you also want to import java.awt.event.everything. So events are when you have when you have buttons, when you have text being typed in, and the user does something, inputs something, an event is generated, and that event sort of directs the program. Okay, so we'll talk more about that in the coming days. Okay, so I've got a class. It's called GUI, and GUI extends Jpanel. So Jpanel is a Java class. But let's just go right down to the main method. Okay, and I start out with a JFrame, so Java frame called myFrame, which is a new JFrame titled myWindow. Okay, so this is going to create a window. This will create an empty window, I should say, titled myWindow. Okay. So your code is going to give an error unless you include javax.swing.star, because that's where the JFrame class is. Okay. So then we are going to set the bounds. So myFrame.setBounds, that's a method of the JFrame class. And the first two numbers are the coordinates of where the window is going to show up. So where is the upper left-hand corner of the window going to show up when we start the program? Okay. So it's going to show up 100 pixels over and 100 pixels down. So the upper left-hand corner is going to be roughly right here. And then set bounds is going to, so we also have the width. So it's going to be 300 pixels wide and 200 pixels tall. So the upper left-hand corner is going to be right here, and it's going to maybe be this large, something like that. So then we have, so let me type this in, sets starting location and dimensions of window. Okay. myFrame.set default close operation, jframe.exit on close. So that means that the program will end when the window is closed. Okay, so the program just keeps running until someone clicks the close icon on the window. So then I have a Jpanel called Canvas, which is a new GUI. All right. So what is a Jpanel? A Jpanel, so JFrame is just the window itself, like the menu at the top, okay, and the sliders and all that stuff. The Jpanel is what goes in the window. So it's basically the content of the window. And you can see that I'm not declaring a new Jpanel, I'm declaring a new GUI. So why can I do that? It's because the GUI class that I'm writing extends Jpanel. So it inherits from Jpanel. So that means that my GUI class is a Jpanel. So I can make that declaration. That's just fine. And then, so I can see for myFrame.getContentPane, so that's going to basically add my Jpanel into the window. Because this is object-oriented programming, so the content of the window is considered to be a separate object from the window itself, so we have to add the content to the window into the window. And then we make it visible. So this is basically identical to the code that we were messing around with last week. Okay? Comment that out. Okay, so now let's look at so I put the main method in the class GUI. Okay, so let's look at the constructor for the GUI class. And so the constructor for the GUI class, remember the GUI is basically your Jpanel. So this is what goes in the window. So the constructor is going to put things into the canvas. It's going to put things into the window. Okay, so what you can see is for my particular GUI, I have a J button called button 1 that says click me. It's a new J button that is going to have the title, it's going to say in the button click me. So this is make a button that says click me. Okay. And I'm not going to, we'll come back to this after I compile it. And then I'm going to add that button to the canvas. So the way, remember, this is object-oriented programming. So the button is a separate object from the canvas that the button goes on, which is separate from the window that the canvas goes in. Okay, so it's kind of hierarchical. Okay, so we create the button, we add the button to the Jpanel, we add the Jpanel to the JFrame. Okay, so it's nested. And then I'm going to add a second button called button 2, which is a new J button that says don't click me. And then I add that one to the canvas. All right. So let's compile this. And then let's run it. So here I have my window. It's got the dimensions, and then it has a button called click me and a button called don't click me. So I'm clicking on both of them, but nothing is happening. Why is nothing happening when I click? Oops. Why is nothing happening when I click these buttons? Well, the reason is that I didn't say what to do. Okay? I didn't say what to do when we click the buttons. Okay? So what you want to do, if you want the program to actually do something when you click the buttons, you have to add an action listener. Okay? So the add action listener method of JButton is going to add something that is listening. Listening, I say listen because it's going to generate an action whenever the button is clicked. Okay, and so the action listener that I'm adding is called a good button listener. Okay, so basically I'm adding a listener so that a button something so that the program does something when button is clicked. Okay. And then I also added a bad button listener to the don't click me button. So I have two listeners that are listening for, and they're separate listeners listening for each button to be clicked. Okay. So good button listener, bad button listener. Those aren't standard Java classes, so I have to write those classes. And because these classes are only going to be used by this program, I'm going to use what is called a private inner class. This is a private inner class. And so you can see private class, good button listener, private class, bad button listener. Okay. And so these private inner classes are classes that are only going to be used by GUI. So it doesn't really make sense to separate them and make them different from, they don't need their own file, their own .java file, because they're only going to be used by my class GUI. Okay, and you can see that they implement action listener. So that's an interface when you see implement. Okay, so it implements the interface action listener. And remember, if you recall, an interface is a contract. So there's an action listener interface. And an interface means that your class must have certain methods. Okay? And so the only method in the action listener interface is this method called action performed. Okay? So must include action performed method. Okay? If you implement action listener. Okay? And so literally that's all there is for this class. Okay? Is it just has a single method. The constructor is just an empty constructor. If you write a class and you don't put the constructor in, it will just be empty. So it just won't do anything when you create that object. That's fine. So I have the action perform method. So basically what happens is when the button is clicked, it generates an action event, which is then picked up by the good button listener class. So basically when the button is clicked, it's going to run the action performed method. So what do I want to happen when the good button is clicked? Well, I want to do system.out.println, you're a good boy. It's like a Pavlovian program here. Okay. And that's it. So we're just going to print to the terminal, you're a good boy. All right. And so for my bad button listener, you can see when the action is performed, it prints, you're a bad boy. All right. So we have different things are happening depending on which button is clicked. So if button 1 is clicked, then the good button listener class is listening for that, and so it's going to do its action performed method. If you click button 2, the bad button listener is listening to it, and so its action performed method is going to be run. So, if you wanted a different thing to happen for each button clicked, you would have a different inner class for each button. Okay, so you can see why it's useful to have private inner classes, because otherwise you would, it would just be a lot of external files that you would have to include for something that's really quite simple. So let's compile this code and run it. Okay, so let's see. If I push the click me button, you can see that in the terminal it says you're a good boy. Okay. If I do if I do the don't click me, it says you're a bad boy in the terminal. Okay, I can go back and forth between the two. So, so there you have it. And then when I close the window, the program will end. So this is sort of an introduction to a simple GUI. So what I want you to feel comfortable with is to feel comfortable creating a window and putting some stuff into the window, in particular buttons, and then having the program do something when the button is clicked. One thing I'm not worried about today is how do we make, I haven't said anything at all about sort of the geometric arrangement of these buttons within the window, things of that nature. We're not worried so much about making it look good. We're just interested in the content. So we'll talk about that later. There are obviously ways to put a button in a certain spot within a window. But what the program will do, if you don't specify where you want all this stuff to go, is it just kind of shoves it all in there. So that's what we're going to do for right now. Let's take a look at the JFrame class. The JFrame class has, if you look at it, it doesn't really have that many. It has some methods, but not a huge amount. But these are the methods that are just for the JFrame class. But we can see that JFrame is inherited from, so here's the inheritance, okay? JFrame inherits from frame, which inherits from window, which inherits from container, which inherits from component, which inherits from object. Okay? So even though JFrame has a relatively small number of methods that are just added for the JFrame class, there are a ton of methods from these other classes that it is inherited from. So these are all the methods from the frame class. These are all the methods from the window class. These are all the methods from the container class, from the component class. So there's tons and tons and tons and tons of methods here, and I'll be honest with you, I don't have them all memorized by a long shot. So you're going to have to play around with it. And then if you want to know what these methods do, well, you then can look at the documentation for the frame class, and you can look at the documentation for the window class, and you can look at the documentation for the container class and the component class. So this is why I'm saying it's a tough concept, because there's a lot there, and you're going to want to experiment. I think experimenting with the code is the best way to go. Also, you might want to open up the Jpanel documentation. And your assignment today, is going to involve getting text that the user types in. And so to add a text field for the user to type into a window, you're going to be using the class JTextField. And so if you add a JText field to a window, it's going to add a little text box, okay? And so you're going to have a listener for that. But let's just look. So there's a lot of methods for this class, but the one that you really want to use is getText. So the getText method, let's look at it, will return a string that is the whatever is typed in to that text field. Okay, so if you run the getText method, that's going to pull the text that is typed into the window and get it so that you can use it in your program. Okay, so that's going to be a method that you will need for today's assignment. All right. So as I said before, it's the same lesson for SL and HL, and so I think that's everything for today. So I will see you in the Zoom room. Bye for now.